it's you gotta love God's timing on things. You know, like the children's church, like maybe going back to this. Catherine's got them. Children's church. You know, these sermons I plan out, well in advance and get all out. But I just kind of go past passage. I wasn't really thinking about, what happens around the time that I'm planning the sermons. And we just had our election week, and we're having riots and whatnot, and a lot of division and hate, and just craziness going on. Maybe almost even worse than before the election. And we're coming to a passage today when Jesus gives us the two greatest commandments. And I was like, wow, what a passage that we need to go through. Right, it's a time where getting so distracted by the things going on in the world. To bring us back, zero us back in on the two greatest commandments. So, quick question for you: if you can tell me what a core value is, and I'm not talking about mining, Ryan or Vern, not core, but a core value.
Something you believe very deeply.
Something you believe very deeply. What is that, Paul?
The very center of it.
The very center. Yeah. But you center your life around, what you center, like businesses have core values, and what you center the business around. I was in the Air Force. We have the Air Force core values. George, remember what they are? No? By the way, George, happy Veterans Day. Is there any other Veterans Day? I want to make sure I don't miss anybody. Just letting you know, people. So, thank you, George, for your service. Send to Glenn. He's not here. So. I wasn't in as long as you, though. You have us all beat. So thank you, George. And even though you don't know the core values of the Air Force, core values of the Air Force is what was drilled into us in basic training, and we centered our whole lives on integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. Integrity first, service before self, excellence in all we do. That was drilled into us that however you are as a member of the Air Force, that needs to be your core values. From the lowest airman to the highest general, they center who they are in the Air Force around those three core values. And that's our center of our life, so it drives us. So you may be thinking, well, what's my core values? Personally, we should have personal core values. A church should have core values. And you may, think, okay, what are they? But here's a few questions that might help you in figuring out what your core value truly is. If I knew that tomorrow would be the last full day of my life, what would I do?
Right.
If a list of adjectives were compiled to describe my life, what words would I like to see on that list? If I were to die tomorrow, what would I want people to remember as my most important achievement? Am I investing myself in those things that matter to me? Is there any person or cause I'd be willing to die for? If I were to write a letter to my children or grandchildren about what was most important in my life, what would I tell them? And if only a single word could be written on your tombstone, what would it be? That help figure out, okay, what is truly my core beliefs? Well, thankfully, Jesus has given us two core values to center our lives around that we're going to get to in this passage. So we're going to turn to Matthew 22, verse 34 to 40 is going to be at today. So Matthew 22, starting in verse 34. So that's page 828. We got the Black Pew Bible. Matthew 22. I'm going to start up in verse 34. Let me pray first. Oh, Father, as we come to hear your word, Father, I pray you just cast aside what's going on in the world, on the outside, what we have to do before or after, even what's going on with the kiddos back in children's church, almost to zero in and focusing on your word right now, Lord. Open our hearts, open our minds, open our hands to your word. We may do your word, Lord. Give me the words to say to be your vessel today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, Matthew 22, starting at verse 34. Remember, Jesus has been going through this series of encounters, right? He taught with the 3 parables. Now he's on a series of encounters, and we're on the third one, starting in verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So the first core value, my take-home points are pretty easy today. It's to love God. He's laying it out there. Love God. So we're in our third encounter between the religious leaders and Jesus. Remember the first one, I'm talking about taxes to Caesar. They tried to trick him there. The Pharisees sent some of their disciples. They weren't full-on Pharisees, as well as some Herodians. The polar opposite enemies. They would normally hate each other, but Jesus was the enemy. The enemy is my friend. So they joined forces to try to trick him. Well, Jesus proved that one wrong. We have 2 citizenships here on earth as well as in heaven, but we know the one in heaven trumps this one here. I must say Trump.
I know it's
A political connotation.
I had to fit it in somewhere.
Yeah. I didn't mean to do that. As I said it, it came out. So that's the first encounter. Second encounter we did last week is with the Sadducees, tied in with the temple. And they didn't believe in the resurrection, the afterlife. That's why they're sad, you see, because there's no afterlife. I get it? And he rebuffed them, pointing out that all throughout the law, there's an afterlife. And he's the God of the living, not the God of the dead. He said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not I was the God of Abraham and Isaac, but I am. He's pointing out. He's going through these different groups. And then now we have the Pharisees. So the first encounter with the Pharisees was with the disciples. So there's probably your students of Pharisees, probably not full-blown Pharisees that came with the Herodians about the tax issue. But now the Pharisees proper, they see what just happened with the Sadducees, and they didn't get along either. Sadducees and Pharisees don't get along. And so they plotted out. What do? They gather together. They're very purposeful and okay, we need to trick this guy. And what do? And one of them, a lawyer, in the ESV, it's really not a lawyer in today's sense. It wasn't a guy in a 3-piece suit that comes up and says, before a judge. These are your Old Testament law experts. They know the law inside and out. And they said that this is the main person among the Pharisees. This would be the who's who of the religious law keepers. They pick. Then they asked him, they go and test him with a question. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? The great commandment. Well, I've always wondered, what are they talking about here? Because where we talked about on Wednesdays, when I was going to define the terms, right? What are they talking about? Well, when I talk about commandment, there's not 10 commandments he's talking about here, because obviously the 2 he quotes aren't in the 10 commandments. They're found elsewhere. But he's talking about the Old Testament law as a whole. There's all the Old Testament had Mosaic law built in throughout it. And so they took all of it. And what's the greatest? Well, the Pharisees, they're the ones that made up all these crazy, crazy rules out there about how many steps you could take on the Sabbath. you know. And I mean, they made up 613 commandments for the Jews to have to live by. Could you imagine trying to live your life like that? 613 do's and do nots. You know, and actually, I think it was 248 248 which you're supposed to do commandments, and then 365 don't do this commandments. One for each day of the year. That's kind of nice, even though there are different calendar then. But I mean, that's crazy. And so, individually, those commandments would come up against each other, right? I mean, because you go on the Sabbath, and you're counting your steps, and you come into your steps, and there's a guy who needs help another 15 steps away. Oh, do I break the Sabbath law and take 15 more steps, or do I break God's law and not help the person who needs help? You know, they would always be clashing. And so the Pharisees kind of ranked the commandments. They had the heavy commandments, the one more important, and like the light ones of, okay, you know, these are the ones that you can break. You know, so if these two are at odds with each other, break this one down here, the lesser one. You know, and I mean, it's totally ridiculous. And they were constantly debating about the precise ranking of those commandments, the 613 of them. And so with this in mind, that's why he comes up and asks, what's the greatest commandment? Of these 613 commandments, which one's the greatest? And remember, they highly esteemed Moses, because Moses gave them Mosaic law. You know, and if you went against Moses, ooh, they're going to hold you to the fire on that one. And so that's why they're trying to trick him. They're trying to get him to say something that would go against the Mosaic law with these other 613 commandments that they made up. So it's pretty crazy. That's this web they're trying to get them all entangled with. They asked the question. And how did Jesus respond? You know, did he just give up and say, oh man, I don't know? No, he never does that, right? You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your mind. This command is actually what they call the Shema. And it's from Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. Verse starts in verse 4 of Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So the Shema was something Jews were required to recite 2 times a day in that time. So they knew this commandment, the exact commandment that Jesus quotes. They had to give that twice a day. So everyone would. And if the 3 terms they're given, and don't get too caught up on that the Deuteronomy says heart, soul, and might, and Jesus says heart, soul, and mind. That's a little linguistic thing. I'm not going to do too much into it, but Jesus puts mind in there because the Greek philosophy now has the human divided into 3 parts, body, soul, and mind. And does he say love the Lord God with just your soul, just your heart, just your mind? No, all of them. These are the overlapping categories for our whole person. He desires all of us, not just what we possess, but all. The heart is the seat of emotions. The soul is the center of personality. The mind is the place of reason. So the Shema first points to God and affirms His unity and uniqueness. He is the covenant keeper. He revealed Himself to us. He has demonstrated His love towards us. And what does He say about it? Is this just a commandment to waffle on? No, He says this is the first and greatest commandment. You know, there is no wiggle room there. This is the first, but you know, it may not be the greatest. Maybe you don't know we're going to trump it. No, the first and the greatest. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. All of your being. Nothing can go this. The other term we need to address is love. That's a term that has probably taken on a quite different meaning in today's world versus the Hebrew world. I mean, when people say love today, what are they talking about? Mushy feelings, emotions. Can you feel the love tonight? You know, it's all this, you know, you sing hands and sing kumbaya, you know, we love each other. No, that's not the love that is understood in Jesus' time. Love is a choice. It's a commitment. It's a sacrifice. So it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's not a kumbaya, emotional love. I mean, that may happen, but that's not the main focus of it. The main focus is it's a choice. It's a commitment. It's a submission to the Lord in that love. So when you make sure you understand what love is talking about, sometimes we can we put our postmodern Western thinking on the word love, and the word love. The thing is, we get caught up in the word submission, and it's a great thing when you submit to the Creator, the one who made us. What greater person to love? Bill Bright wrote, my life's message is to be a slave of Jesus, and all that it involves. Love your master, trust your master, obey your master. Obviously, I'm a son of God, an heir of God, a joint heir with Christ. And if he is described as a slave, and Peter and Paul and the other apostles were slaves, then this to me is the highest privilege anyone could know. I evaluate everything I do in light of what he wants me to do. I try to relate every move, every day, in light of how I can help fulfill his great commission and fulfill his commandments. We are to love the Lord your God. A little further on in Deuteronomy 10:12, Moses writes this, and now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. To serve the Lord. But just a quarter of it? Just half works, right? Well, come on. Give me 75%. 100. He wants all of it. He wants all of it. If Jesus isn't Lord of all, then he isn't Lord at all. Keep his commandments. As Jesus said in John 14:15, if you love me, obey my commandments. You cannot say you love the Lord and don't do what he says. You cannot love the Lord and be unwilling to change.
Yeah.
Loving the Lord requires commitment, requires sacrifice, and means putting him first in your life. You also can't love the world, because we are different from the world. Especially in this, how we define love. How many of the world would love to hear that we say love means to sacrifice and to submit? Those are words people don't like to hear. A professor in a theological ethics class began his semester by reading a letter from a parent to a government official. The parent complained that his son had received a good education, gone on to the right schools, was headed for a good job as a lawyer. But he had gotten involved with a weird religious sect. The father continued that the members of this sect controlled his every move, told him whom to date, whom not to date, and had taken all his money. Parents pleaded with the government official to do something about this strange religious group. And the professor turned to ask his students, who was this letter describing? Of course, they debated a lot, they came up with their fringe groups we think about, if we go back a few years, the Branch Davidians, these comic people, or other kind of weird religious groups we think of, right? Or, this guy's name, drink a Kool-Aid group, we think of those, right? Then we revealed that the letter is actually from the 3rd century. It's a Roman letter. And it's describing Christianity. Someone who had become a Christian and the parent could not fathom what was going on in this kid's life. It's different. But even back then, it's closer, it's much closer to Christ's time than we are. What they viewed sacrifice as for one another, to love the Lord your God. We have watered down what it means by commitment. We've watered down what love means. We've watered down what surrender means. We find our excuses out of it. But Jesus lays it out there pretty clear for us. Love the Lord your God by heart, soul, and mind. It's the first and the greatest. Number 2. Core value number 2. Love people. This is always funny. The lawyer, the expert of the law comes up and asks, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus gives them the top 2. And I want to give you more than what you bargained for. You see, they go hand in hand. You can't, just say love over to God without continuing on. Because we've talked about how, right, we have 2 relationships, right? We have a vertical relationship with God, especially when we come in our worship time. We worship God. And then we have a horizontal relationship with one another, right? Helping one another and worshiping God. So he said to love the Lord your God with heart, mind, and soul. Now he's going to speak to the horizontal relationship. He says the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor? Anyone you come in contact with. The Jews tried to, they would try to limit it to just fellow Jews. They didn't want to get into anything else. But for us, it's everybody. And this love, it's a purposeful, intentional, and active. Not sentimental, not just emotional. And how do we measure this love? By your love for yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. So when you're hungry, if you love yourself, what do? Eat. If you're tired and you love yourself, sleep. You take care of yourself, right? Yourself, when you feel yourself getting out of touch with God, hopefully you get right, you pray, come to church. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you're going to love God, you also have to love people. There's a kind of contradiction there going on. And Jesus sums it up as even further. He says, the entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments. Now remember, see, law and the prophets is referring to all the Old Testament. They divided the Old Testament in half. The law being the first part of the Old Testament, the prophets being the other part. So whenever we see law and prophets, he's talking about all of the Old Testament. And everything hinges on these 2 commandments. Love the Lord, love your neighbor. They're the heart of every scripture. And that's one of the core values of the Bible. Love the Lord your God and love people. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis wrote, do not waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor, but act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you're behaving as if you love somebody, you'll presently come to love them. Now, if you injure someone you dislike, you find yourself disliking him more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. This is not an emotion. It's a choice to love your neighbor, even when it's not easy to. We love, because he first loved us. He sent his son to die on the cross for us. Right? right there. Jesus came to the earth. We are his neighbors. And he died for his neighbors. That's the example we have for us. So to say you love God and not love people is a contradiction. James 2, James has some great verses about how your faith is lived out, it's acted out. James 2, 14 through 15. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anybody? Suppose you see a brother or sister has no food or clothing, and you say, goodbye, have a good day, stay warm and eat well, but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? True faith requires action. If we're going to follow Jesus, we have to follow his example. If we're going to ask the old question, what would Jesus do? You better do it. Don't just ask the question. There's an example of a story here of 6 people trapped up in the north on the Arctic. They have a fire going, but it's dying out. But they each hold a log. The first one, a Republican, says, I'm not going to give this to the Democratic cross. I don't want him to keep living. So he keeps it. Next person, poor person. Why would I give this to the rich man in our group? He has everything he needs anyway. I'm going to keep on to it. Next person, Democrat. I hate that Republican. I want him to stay warm. He hangs on to his log. And you have a rich man. And he's used to hoarding everything. He got it the wrong way. And he hoards his branch. Then you have someone, a Christian. But he's sitting there saying, none of these people go to my church. Why should I help them? I'm going to keep my law. And you got a guy who's used to doing whatever it takes to get ahead in life, and he keeps his law. Stay ahead. Because he didn't want to get behind if he gives up his law. But what happens? Fire goes out. Still holding on to their logs. They're so focused on themselves. So focused on what's going on in their life. John Wesley and George Whitefield. They lived back in the 18th century, so 1700s. They were amazing preachers and theologians. They led some major movements in the 1700s. The problem was Wesley and Whitefield were on opposite ends of the spectrum when it came to the theology. But even while they were still friends while going through college at Oxford, but as they continued through college and get older and go more theologically different, they drifted apart. And unfortunately, among their followers, they became even more headed. Their followers didn't like each other as well. Not only Whitefield and Wesley, but the followers. And one of Whitefield's followers came up and made this comment about Wesley. He said, "We won't see John Wesley in heaven, will we?" To which Whitefield replied, "Yeah, you're right. We won't see him in heaven. He will be so close to the throne of God, and we will be so far away that we won't be able to see him." You see, that despite the fact that they disagreed, Whitefield still believed Wesley was a man of God. And he had the respect for one that was so great that when Whitefield died, his family asked Wesley to preach the funeral, despite the differences. So we can learn there, especially in today's world. We come across people who didn't vote like we vote, who hold political views different from how we view, do things that we don't agree with. Are we loving them? Love the Lord your God first, and love your neighbor. That can be a wide range of things. That may range from giving a helping hand. It may be being a listening ear. It may be speaking truth into their life that they really need to hear. But love them. If we don't demonstrate and help others in our world, we don't often find real love. A love that comes from Christ. If we don't be that model for them, and develop hearts that are open to God's grace, and God's peace, and God's voice, then all these cycles that we have of despair and violence and hate and empty living will just keep on going. The only thing that will end greed and hate, violence, is the love of Jesus. The only thing that can end irresponsibility and immorality that leads to shattered lives, the only thing that can heal that is the love of Jesus. There's no end of selfishness and self-indulgence that leads to crime except in the love of Jesus. Real love. Not fluffy, frou-frou love, but love that is committed, that sacrifices and submits. That kind of love that's rooted in our love for God first is the answer. So let's keep these two core values. What's our first core value? Love God. With 25%? All. Mind, heart, and soul. Love the Lord your God. And out of that flows, number 2, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Not just in, I love you, but in displays of action. Displays of action of Christ's love, not our love that is fallible and mess up. Let's pray. Well, Father, we are so thankful for, how big and how awesome your Word of God is. And sometimes they can actually get pretty intricate trying to relate passages and figure out how things fit together. And passages can be confusing. All right, Lord, what in the world did you mean here? I know, Lord, we come to a passage like today. Lord, you lay it out there. There is no angle. There's nothing hidden meaning we need to dive into. It is laid out there for us. Lord, thank you for that. You make it so simple. The entirety of your word, Lord. The core values that you live. The core values that you live as an example for us to have as our center. Is to love the Lord. To love our neighbor. Thank you, Lord, for that simple, simple teaching. I want to mold us and change us.